was just after sunset when the woman turned onto the quiet street, the kind of road most people only use to get home faster. The air was warm, and the city felt tired after a long day. She drove calmly, not in a rush, not distracted. Her hands rested steady on the wheel, and her mind was focused on the meeting she had just left. Nothing about the moment felt important. It felt ordinary. A police car appeared behind her, lights flashing without sound at first. She noticed it right away and slowed down, pulling to the side exactly as she was supposed to. She checked her mirrors, turned off the engine, and waited. She had done this before, like anyone else who had spent years traveling for work. She took a slow breath and reminded herself to stay polite and clear. 2 officers stepped out of the car. They moved with the confidence of people who felt fully in control. One walked toward her window, while the other stayed back, watching. Their faces were relaxed, almost bored. Like this stop was a small break in an otherwise dull shift. The woman rolled down her window and looked up at them. Her expression was calm, not nervous, not defensive. She greeted them in a steady voice and asked how she could help. One officer leaned slightly closer, looking inside her car longer than necessary. His eyes moved over the clean interior, the neat stack of papers on the passenger seat, and then back to her face. He told her she had been driving a little too confident, though he didn't explain what that meant. She nodded and asked politely if she had missed a speed sign or a signal. The question seemed to annoy him. He smirked and said he would decide what mattered. The second officer laughed quietly from behind, as if the moment amused him. The woman stayed quiet. She had learned long ago that silence was sometimes safer than trying to explain too much. She reached slowly for her documents when asked and handed them over without any sudden movement. As the officer looked at her papers, he made a joke about how calm she was acting. He said most people started shaking by now. She replied simply that she believed in following rules and staying respectful. That answer meant to ease the situation, seemed to do the opposite. The officer raised an eyebrow and said respect had to be earned. He asked her what she did for work. She answered honestly, but briefly, without detail or pride. He laughed and repeated her words to his partner, twisting them slightly to sound smaller than they were. The other officer chuckled. The woman noticed how quickly the mood had changed. What began as a routine stop was turning into something else. Still, she did not raise her voice. She asked again, calmly, if there was a specific issue with her driving. The officer ignored the question and told her to step out of the car. She paused for just a second, not out of fear, but to make sure she followed the order correctly. Then she opened the door and stepped onto the pavement. The street was quiet, but a few people in nearby cars slowed down, watching. The officer told her to stand by the hood. She did as told, keeping her hands visible. She asked if she was being detained or just questioned. The questions seemed to strike a nerve. The officer's smile tightened. He said she was asking too. Any questions for someone in her position? She replied that she was only trying to understand the process. She said it calmly, without accusation. That calmness made him more irritated. He said people like her always thought they were smarter than the law. The woman did not respond to that. The second officer stepped closer now. He made a comment about how confident she looked, how people like her usually ended up learning a lesson. The words were said casually, but there was something sharp underneath. The woman felt the weight of the moment. She knew this situation could easily become worse if she reacted the wrong way. She focused on breathing evenly and keeping her voice steady. She reminded herself that everything was being recorded. Even if the officers seemed to forget that, without warning, the first officer told her to turn around. Before she could ask why, he grabbed her wrists and pulled them behind her back. The cold metal of the handcuffs closed around her arms. The sound echoed louder than it should have. People nearby stopped completely now. A few phones were lifted, recording. The officer announced loudly that she was being detained for obstruction, though he did not explain what she had obstructed. The second officer laughed and said she should have stayed quiet. The woman felt a brief sting of humiliation. She did not fight or protest. She stood still, her posture straight. She asked in a clear voice what she was being charged with. The officer told her she would find out soon enough. As they guided her toward the police car, one officer made a mocking comment about how fast confidence disappeared once the cuffs came out. The other said something about how people always thought they were above the rules until reality showed up. She said nothing. Inside, she felt a mix of disappointment and focus. This was not her first experience with power being misused, but it was still painful to watch it happen so openly. She knew every word spoken, every laugh, every gesture mattered. They placed her beside the car, not inside it yet. One officer leaned against the door, relaxed, as if enjoying the moment. He asked again what she did for work, this time with a teasing tone. She answered the same way she had before. His laughter stopped for just a second, then continued louder, as if to cover something. He said she didn't look important enough to be acting so calm. He said people who mattered always made noise. The woman looked straight ahead and replied that some people didn't need to. That answer irritated him even more. He said she was about to learn how small she really was. He told her to keep quiet unless spoken to. The second officer nodded in agreement, clearly convinced this stop would end. With paperwork and a good story for later, what they did not notice was how carefully the woman was listening. She remembered every word, every tone. She knew exactly when to speak and when not to. Her calm was not surrender. It was patience. As traffic slowly moved again, and the officers joked among themselves, the woman asked once more in a steady voice if she could make a phone call. The officers exchanged a look and laughed. One of them said she could call whoever she wanted, but it wouldn't change anything. She nodded slightly, accepting the answer for now. She looked at the darkening sky and the streetlights flickering on. To anyone watching, she looked like someone who had lost control of her situation. In truth, this was only the beginning. The woman stood by the side of the police car, handcuffed, under the dim glow of the streetlights. The night had grown cooler, and the faint hum of traffic moved in the distance. She kept her eyes forward, breathing steadily, aware of every movement around her. The officers seemed relaxed, almost too relaxed, as if they were performing for an invisible audience. Their laughter had calmed into low chuckles, and one of them leaned against the car with his arms crossed. Clearly enjoying the moment, she had noticed a few onlookers slowing down, some taking photos or videos with their phones. A small crowd of curious faces formed across the street. She could feel their eyes, some full of sympathy, others curious or even amused. Despite the attention, she did not falter. Her composure remained solid, like a calm center in the middle of a storm. The officer who had first approached her made a comment about how funny it was that she wasn't panicking. He said most people begged or argued by now. She stayed quiet, letting the words hang in the air, not giving them the satisfaction of a response. That silence seemed to irritate him further. He tapped his foot impatiently and muttered something about people who think they're untouchable. The second officer, standing a little behind, started joking about her posture. He said she looked like she was posing for a photo rather than being arrested. The first officer laughed, but it was short and forced. The woman could see the change in his expression, even if it was subtle. She had learned to read people quickly. She knew that her calm was unsettling them more than any argument or resistance could. One officer asked her again about her work, trying to get a reaction. She answered simply, without pride or explanation, and kept her voice steady. This made the first officer sigh loudly and roll his eyes. He muttered that people like her always talked in riddles, trying to hide their real importance. She listened, aware of every word, every inflection, knowing that what was said here could matter later. Then, without warning, the officer who had leaned on the car stepped forward. He asked her if she understood why she was being detained. She asked politely if he could explain what exactly she had done wrong. He laughed again, saying that she would understand soon enough. The second officer chuckled, adding that some lessons needed to be taught the hard way. The woman kept quiet, simply standing still and breathing slowly. The first officer waved toward the car and told her to get inside. She complied, but slowly and deliberately, making sure to follow the instructions exactly. Once inside, she noticed the cramped interior and the faint smell of leather mixed with the lingering scent of the night air. She sat calmly, hands cuffed in front of her now for comfort, and waited. Inside the car, the atmosphere was different. The officers had become slightly tense, realizing that their earlier laughter did not provoke her. She kept her posture relaxed, almost indifferent, and that seemed to unsettle them more than she could have imagined. She could hear their whispered comments to each other, trying to figure out what to do next, their confidence waning. A car drove past slowly, the driver glancing curiously at the scene. She noticed the fleeting looks of concern on some faces. She wondered briefly how the story might be told later by the people who had stopped and watched. But she pushed the thought aside. Her focus was on staying calm and keeping control of her own reactions. The officer who had spoken first finally broke the silence. He asked if she realized the trouble she could be in. She answered that she was following instructions and wanted to understand the situation clearly. His expression darkened, frustration evident in the tightening of his jaw. The second officer muttered something about people who were too calm for their own good. She noticed every small movement and every change in tone. She had learned that details mattered. A shift in body language, a pause, a change in voice could all reveal intentions or fear. She watched them carefully, never giving them more than they deserved. Her quiet strength was deliberate, a shield and a statement. Then came the moment when one officer moved to handcuff her wrists behind her back again, just to assert control. She didn't resist, but she asked quietly if this was standard procedure. The officer shrugged and said it didn't matter what she thought. The other officer smirked, clearly enjoying the display of authority. She stayed still, letting them perform their actions without reaction. Inside, she felt a steady sense of patience. Knowing that everything happening now would matter later, the conversation between the officers continued, half joking, half serious. They discussed minor details of her demeanor, how she didn't act like most people they arrested. She remained calm, letting their words pass over her. She knew that any visible reaction would feed the narrative they were building for themselves. Her composure was a quiet resistance, invisible to some, powerful to those who could see it. The woman then asked, politely, if she could contact someone. The officers exchanged looks as if debating whether to allow it. One said she could call, but it wouldn't make a difference. She nodded, accepting the answer, but inside, she felt a sense of focus and strategy. She understood that timing and patience were as important as words and actions. As the minutes passed, the laughter of the officers faded into awkward silence. They seemed to realize, slowly, that their attempt to humiliate her was not going as planned. The woman noticed the subtle shift in their posture, the way their voices lacked the earlier confidence. She didn't smile or gloat. She just observed. She had learned long ago that observation was a powerful tool, often stronger than confrontation. Outside the car, a few onlookers were still watching. The woman could see their phones, the small glows of screens capturing the moment. She felt a brief flicker of empathy for them. People often assumed they understood a situation from the outside, but reality was more complex. She remained quiet, letting the moment unfold naturally. Then, instead of testing her patience, one officer asked again about her work. She repeated her answer calmly, without elaboration. The first officer's face tightened. He muttered something about people who think they're untouchable. The words intended to belittle had little effect. She maintained her composure, silently proving that control could be maintained without anger or resistance. The second officer then made a comment about how she was acting like she owned the night, like she was untouchable. She said nothing, her silence louder than any words could have been. The tension in the car shifted, subtle but noticeable. The officers were starting to realize that her calmness was not fear or weakness, it was strength. Minutes stretched into longer minutes, and the woman continued to observe. She noted the smallest details, the way one officer tapped his fingers nervously, the quick glance the other gave him, the slight tightening of their shoulders. Each detail mattered. Each detail was a clue to the changing dynamics of the situation. She remained patient, knowing that the turning point was coming. She asked again, politely, if there was a specific charge. The first officer hesitated, then said they would explain soon. The second officer smirked, but there was a hint of unease. The woman's calm, steady presence was beginning to affect them more than any words or resistance could have. The street outside remained quiet. the faint sounds of cars and distant voices the only background. The night felt heavy, charged with tension, but she remained composed, focused entirely on her own actions and reactions. She knew that her patience and quiet observation were her greatest tools in this moment. She understood that control could be maintained without aggression, without anger, and without surrender. The officers, now less confident, continued their small talk, but the laughter was gone. Their attempts to dominate the situation had lost power. The woman remained calm, quiet, and deliberate. Her focus on staying steady, aware, and patient was slowly changing the dynamic. They were beginning to understand, in small ways, that she was not ordinary, and that her calm was not fear, it was control. She remained seated, hands cuffed, posture straight, voice steady. The minutes passed slowly, each one a test of patience, a silent demonstration of quiet strength. Outside, the world continued, unaware of the subtle power struggle unfolding inside a parked police car. She waited, knowing that the next moments would reveal the true turning point of the night. The woman sat quietly in the back of the police car, her hands still cuffed in front of her for comfort. Outside, the street was almost empty, except for a few cars passing slowly, their drivers glancing curiously at the scene. The officers inside the car had stopped joking, and a tense silence had taken its place. Their earlier confidence seemed to have evaporated, replaced with subtle unease. She noticed it immediately, as one does when they have spent a lifetime reading people's behavior. She decided it was time to act, but not with force or confrontation. Instead, she reached for the small phone tucked in her purse, which lay beside her on the seat. Her movements were deliberate, calm, and smooth, like a person who knew exactly what they were doing. She unlocked the device carefully and typed a brief, precise message. She didn't speak yet. She waited, observing. The officers watched her movements suspiciously. One leaned forward slightly, squinting, as if trying to read her screen. She said nothing, giving no hint of what she was doing. Her silence was intentional, a quiet declaration of control. The first officer muttered something about people always thinking they were smarter than they actually were. The woman did not respond. Then she made the call. The voice on the other end answered promptly, and she spoke calmly but firmly, stating her name, the situation, and requesting immediate guidance. The officers noticed the change in tone, the clarity in her speech, but they still did not fully understand the implications. They assumed it was a routine call for legal advice, nothing more. A few minutes passed, but the woman remained composed. She listened carefully, responding with short, precise sentences. There was no panic, no pleading. The officers' expressions shifted from curiosity to subtle concern. They began whispering to each other, trying to interpret the seriousness of her call. The first officer's jaw tightened. He realized she was not just any civilian. There was a weight behind her calm, a purpose. Then the radio in the patrol car crackled, breaking the quiet tension. One officer adjusted the volume, trying to hear better. The dispatcher's voice was clear and urgent, requesting clarification on the detention. The officers exchanged nervous glances. The woman, still calm, observed everything, her attention sharp. She knew they had no idea who she was really connected to, and that knowledge gave her a quiet power. The officer driving the car muttered, half to himself, about how fast situations could change. The other officer nodded, a trace of worry in his expression. They had assumed this stop would be routine, perhaps even entertaining. Now uncertainty had taken its place. They began to realize that her call was not ordinary, and that they might be in more trouble than they understood. The woman continued speaking on the phone, calmly providing the details requested, answering questions precisely. She did not exaggerate or dramatize. Her voice remained steady and confident, and with each word, the officer's unease grew. The first officer shifted in his seat, glanced at his partner, then back at her, his earlier bravado gone. The second officer's hand tapped lightly on the dashboard, a nervous habit that betrayed his growing concern as she spoke. The dispatcher on the phone confirmed her identity, and suddenly the officers heard a change in the tone of the voice on the radio. Commands were issued, clear and authoritative. asking them to release her immediately. The woman nodded subtly as she listened, but she did not speak over the officers. She allowed the process to unfold exactly as it was supposed to. The first officer's face went pale. He muttered, almost to himself, about how quickly their position had changed. The second officer swallowed hard and leaned back, trying to appear calm, but it was obvious he was shaken. The woman's calm had turned into a tangible presence, shifting the energy in the car. She had not raised her voice, had not argued, yet she had turned the tables completely. The dispatcher continued to speak, requesting that they verify their actions and provide details on the reason for detention. The officers began to fumble, speaking hurriedly, trying to justify their behavior. The woman stayed quiet, listening, every inch of her focused on maintaining composure. Her patience was a quiet force, demonstrating that authority did not always reside with the person wearing the badge. Then came the moment of clarity for the officers. A voice on the radio instructed them to check her credentials immediately. The woman had expected this, had anticipated the moment when her true identity would shift the situation entirely. She remained seated, her posture straight, hands relaxed in front of her. She did not gloat, did not show satisfaction. She simply observed as events unfolded. The officers pulled out their radios, trying to communicate back. But the authoritative voice on the other end made it clear that they were now following orders, not giving them. The first officer's face twitched with tension. He glanced at her, eyes wide, as if suddenly seeing her for the first time. The second officer's smirk had vanished entirely, replaced by a subtle, uneasy frown. The woman then listened quietly as the dispatcher confirmed her role and authority. The weight of her position settled over the car like a heavy, invisible force. The officers realized that every word they had spoken, every mocking gesture, every dismissive comment, had been seen, heard, and recorded. The woman had not reacted, but she had not been powerless. Her patience and clarity had exposed their actions without confrontation. The first officer leaned back, running a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture that betrayed his concern. The second officer fidgeted, checking the rearview mirror, as if the world outside had suddenly become a threatening presence. The woman remained still, her calm unwavering, her focus entirely on listening and following instructions from the authoritative voice on the phone. Then the dispatcher instructed the officers to release her immediately and to step outside for further questioning. The woman remained seated, waiting for them to follow the procedure correctly. The officers complied, their movements now careful and hesitant. The woman's quiet presence had shifted the power dynamic completely. She had not raised her voice, had not argued. Yet she now held control of the situation. The first officer spoke softly into the radio, providing information as requested, his tone subdued. The second officer mirrored his actions, both now aware that the earlier mocking and joking had been completely misplaced. The woman remained calm, listening, allowing the process to continue without interference. Her patience, her observation, and her clarity had achieved what resistance or confrontation could not. Minutes passed, and the officers continued to provide the necessary details. The woman remained still, her posture relaxed, her expression neutral. She had demonstrated control without aggression, had shown strength through patience, and had allowed the authorities to take the proper steps. The tension in the car gradually shifted from fear to compliance. The woman's calm had reshaped the situation entirely. Finally, the dispatcher confirmed that all information had been received and that her release was authorized. The officers followed instructions precisely, removing the handcuffs and opening the door. The woman stepped out slowly, her movements deliberate and composed. She did not speak, did not make any comment. She simply walked with quiet authority. The weight of her presence felt more strongly than words could convey. The street outside seemed to breathe with her release. Onlookers, who had been watching from a distance, remained quiet, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. The woman's calm, her clarity, and her patience had transformed what had started as a routine and mocking detention into a moment of revelation. The officers, now aware of the full scope of the situation, stood silently, watching as she moved forward. Completely in control of her own destiny and the narrative of the night, the woman stepped out of the patrol car slowly. Her hands free now, her posture relaxed, but confident. The officers remained inside for a moment, exchanging glances filled with confusion and growing concern. Their earlier mockery had vanished completely, replaced by a cautious awareness that they were now dealing with someone far beyond their assumptions. The first officer's hand hovered near his radio, as if seeking guidance, but unsure of what to say. The second officer shifted uncomfortably, glancing at his partner and then at the woman who simply stood there, composed and steady. The quiet weight of her presence made it clear that she was in control, that she held a position of authority that they could not challenge. Minutes passed in silence, each second stretching longer than the last. The woman made no move to hurry or explain herself. She let the officers adjust to the reality of the situation. Their initial confidence, so easily displayed, had now dissolved into a mixture of uncertainty and cautious respect. They began to realize that their actions in detaining her had already been recorded, documented, and observed, and that there would be consequences for their behavior. A senior official arrived at the scene, summoned immediately after the call the woman had made. The officers turned to face the approaching figure, their posture rigid, their faces betraying worry. The official's presence alone carried authority, a silent signal that this was no longer a simple traffic stop. The woman remained calm, acknowledging the official with a subtle nod, her expression composed. The senior official approached the patrol car first, speaking directly to the officers. The conversation was quiet, precise, and measured, but the tension was palpable. Commands were given clearly, requiring them to explain their actions and account for the decisions that had led to detaining the woman. The officers complied, but their voices were lower, hesitant, and cautious. The initial bravado was gone. The woman listened carefully, noting each word, each gesture. Her calm, quiet presence served as a reminder of her authority, her control, and the respect that was now demanded. The officers were forced to confront the reality that they had misjudged the situation, that their assumptions had been wrong, and that the woman before them was not just another citizen, but someone whose position carried weight beyond their understanding. The senior official turned toward the woman, addressing her respectfully, acknowledging her role, her position, and the authority she held. It was a formal recognition, but even without words, the acknowledgement was powerful. The officers observed the interaction, their earlier mockery now replaced by a recognition of the truth. The woman's composure, her measured patience, and her clear communication had transformed the entire scenario. One officer muttered under his breath about how quickly everything had changed, how the power dynamic had shifted so completely in such a short time. The woman's calm had not been passive. It had been deliberate, a demonstration of control that left no room for misinterpretation. Her quiet strength had forced the officers to reconsider, to reassess, and to understand the reality of the situation fully. The senior official requested that the woman provide a statement, which she did with clarity and precision. Every word was deliberate, every detail accounted for. She did not exaggerate, did not dramatize. She spoke with authority, recounting the events accurately, and making clear the sequence of interactions and the behavior of the officers. Her calm, professional tone carried weight, emphasizing her credibility and her position. The officers listened, their expressions ranging from unease to embarrassment. They realized that their actions, which had seemed insignificant in the moment, were now subject to scrutiny. Every gesture, every word, every mocking tone was now part of a record that could not be ignored. The woman's patience and composure had ensured that the truth was clear, and that the officer's behavior was undeniable. The senior official then instructed the officers to step aside, to allow for proper documentation and review of the situation. The woman followed the instructions calmly, her demeanor steady. She understood the importance of procedure, of following protocol, and of ensuring that the situation was resolved correctly. Her measured actions emphasized the contrast between her professionalism and the officers' earlier arrogance. As the documentation continued, the officers realized that they were being held accountable in a way they had not anticipated. The woman's presence, her authority, and her composed demeanor had transformed the scene from one of mockery and casual detainment to one of serious accountability. They were no longer in control. The balance of power had shifted entirely. The senior official explained the next steps clearly, detailing the review process and the consequences for any actions that had violated policy or protocol. The officers listened attentively, their earlier confidence replaced by careful attention and respect. The woman remained composed, absorbing the information, preparing to move forward once the necessary procedures were completed. Finally, the senior official turned to the woman, formally acknowledging her position and authority. It was a quiet, respectful gesture, but it carried immense significance. The officers watched, understanding fully now that their initial assumptions had been completely wrong, that the woman they had mocked was far above them in authority and influence. The woman nodded slightly, a small, composed gesture of acknowledgement. She did not gloat, did not show satisfaction. Her calm had been deliberate, her patience had been strategic, and her clarity had ensured that justice and proper procedure were recognized. The officers were left to process the reality of the situation. Their earlier behavior now clearly documented and accountable. The street remained quiet. The night air calm, but the atmosphere had shifted completely. The woman had demonstrated that authority, patience, and composure could achieve more than confrontation or argument ever could. The officers had been forced to recognize her position, to adjust their behavior, and to confront the consequences of their actions. As the scene continued to unfold, the woman's quiet presence served as a reminder that respect and authority were earned not through force or intimidation, but through composure, clarity, and adherence to principle. The officers, now fully aware of the true weight of the situation, complied with every instruction, their earlier arrogance replaced by careful attention and respect. The senior official concluded the review, ensuring that all procedures were followed correctly. The woman had navigated the situation without aggression, without escalation, and without compromise. Her actions had transformed what could have been a humiliating or a dangerous situation into a demonstration of calm authority and professional integrity. The officers, now fully aware of her status and the implications of their behavior, stepped back and allowed her to proceed. The woman walked forward, composed, confident, and unshaken. The night had witnessed a subtle yet profound shift in power. And the lesson was clear: calm authority and measured patience could change even the most challenging situations. As she moved away from the patrol car, the streetlights casting soft shadows on the pavement, she reflected briefly on the experience. She had remained composed, observed carefully, and acted with deliberate precision. Her calm had been her strength, and her clarity had ensured that the situation was resolved correctly and professionally. The officers had learned, perhaps for the first time, that appearances and assumptions could be misleading, and that respect and authority were not to be underestimated. The woman walked down the street, leaving the officers and the senior official behind, her presence still commanding, even in quiet departure. The night had changed, the lesson was clear, and her composure had proven that true authority did not need to be loud, confrontational, or aggressive. It simply needed to be deliberate, measured, and unwavering. The woman walked away from the patrol car, her steps steady and unhurried. The street was quiet now, the tension from earlier lingering faintly in the night air. Onlookers who had been watching from a distance began to move along, some casting curious glances, but the moment had passed. The officers remained near the car, speaking quietly to the senior official, their expressions a mix of embarrassment, regret, and cautious awareness. They were now fully aware that their assumptions, their arrogance, and their mocking behavior had been completely misplaced. The woman paused briefly, taking in the calm of the night around her. Her mind replayed the events, not with anger or frustration, but with a clear sense of purpose. She had maintained composure when it mattered, observed carefully, and acted with deliberate precision. Her patience had allowed the situation to unfold naturally, and her calm authority had shifted the power dynamic completely. She knew that the officers would remember this moment for a long time, perhaps for the rest of their careers. Back at the patrol car, The officers began to file reports under the direction of the senior official. They spoke in measured tones, carefully detailing their actions, the interactions with the woman, and the sequence of events that had led to the detainment. Every detail mattered, and the body camera footage confirmed their words. They were being held accountable in a way they had not expected, and the reality of their situation was sinking in with every passing minute. The senior official oversaw the documentation, ensuring that proper protocol was followed. The officers were instructed to attend a formal review, and the woman's statements were recorded as part of the official record. She remained patient, answering questions calmly, never raising her voice, never showing any sign of agitation. Her professional demeanor served as a reminder of the importance of clarity, patience, and adherence to procedure after the initial documentation was complete. The officers were given instructions on the next steps. They were required to submit detailed written reports and were informed that internal investigations would follow to review their actions and ensure accountability. The woman listened quietly as the instructions were delivered, her focus sharp, her composure unwavering. She understood that this was the proper way to handle the aftermath, that rules and procedure were as important as personal presence and authority. The officers, now fully aware of the seriousness of the situation, complied without argument. The first officer avoided eye contact, speaking only when necessary, while the second officer seemed to shrink slightly under the weight of accountability. Both were silent witnesses to the quiet power the woman had demonstrated, her calm and measured actions leaving a lasting impression. As the formalities concluded, the senior official addressed the woman directly, thanking her for her cooperation and acknowledging her professionalism. It was a quiet, respectful exchange, but its significance was profound. The officers listened, understanding that her calm authority had guided the resolution of the situation and had ensured that proper procedure was followed. There was no gloating, no unnecessary drama. Just respect, acknowledgement, and the clear weight of authority earned through composure and clarity. The woman finally turned to leave, walking down the street with slow, deliberate steps. The night air was cool against her skin, the city quiet around her. She reflected on the events, appreciating how her patience and strategic calm had changed the course of the evening. The officers remained behind, still processing the reality of what had occurred. Their earlier arrogance had been replaced with a careful understanding of the limits of their authority and the importance of respect. As she moved further away from the scene, she could hear the faint murmurs of passersby who had witnessed the events unfold. Some spoke in whispers about what had happened. Some expressed surprise at the way the situation had been handled, and some offered quiet admiration for her composure. She did not seek attention or recognition. She had acted not for spectacle, but for principle, for proper procedure, and for the demonstration of calm authority. In the days that followed, the internal review of the officers' actions continued. The woman provided additional statements as needed, always clear, concise, and professional. The officers faced consequences for their behavior, including formal warnings, retraining, and accountability measures designed to prevent similar incidents in the future. The situation had served as a powerful reminder of the importance of patience, observation, and professional conduct. Meanwhile, the woman continued her life without disruption, moving forward with her responsibilities and commitments. She did not dwell on the incident or seek retribution. Her actions had spoken for themselves and the lessons had been learned. Her calm, measured approach had not only resolved a potentially dangerous situation, but it also ensured that respect, authority, and proper procedure were maintained. The officers, reflecting on the events, began to understand the deeper lessons. They recognized that their assumptions, their attempts at mockery, and their casual arrogance had been entirely misplaced. Respect and authority were not determined by titles or uniforms alone. They were earned through composure, clarity, adherence to procedure, and the ability to remain calm under pressure. The city continued its rhythm, unaware of the quiet but profound shifts that had occurred on that street. The woman's presence, her calm authority, and her patient observation had created a ripple effect, reminding those involved that true strength and control were often silent, measured and deliberate. Eventually, the officers returned to their routine duties. But the memory of the night remained vivid. The lessons were clear. Arrogance and mockery could be dangerous. Patience and composure were powerful, and authority was more than just a badge. The woman's quiet strength had left a lasting impression, one that would shape the way they approached their work and how they treated others in the future. The woman continued to walk through her life with the same steady calm, aware that moments like these were not about proving oneself to others, but about maintaining clarity, integrity, and patience. She had navigated a complex situation without confrontation, without aggression, and without compromise. Her calm had been her strength, and her clarity had ensured that justice and proper procedure were recognized. In the end, the night had transformed from a routine stop into a lesson in authority, respect, and composure. The woman had demonstrated that calm observation, deliberate action, and quiet confidence could shift power, influence outcomes, and ensure that the right course was followed. The officers had learned a lesson they would not forget, and the woman had once again proven that true strength often speaks in silence, with patience, clarity, and integrity guiding every step.